Hey guys, how's it going? On the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi bartending and behind schedule music YouTuber. Bartending, because if you saw on my Instagram as of recording this, I made a cocktail. It was pretty nice. And behind schedule, because if you're looking at the title of this video, you might be thinking, Duke, what the heck is this? You haven't talked about shoegaze in 2 years, and that's a long time. And you're right. It is a long time, but I'm here to finish what I had started that long time ago, to fulfill my destiny and review an absurd amount of shoegaze. And one more thing before we get actually started here. This thumbnail is made by Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer. Please follow Jen in the Instagram below. And you know what would be really awesome? If you hired them. If you gave Jen money. That would be cool. I'm hoping to get it all done this summer, and I just scheduled out this series with the Swans and death metal stuff and a whole other thing I'm doing and a whole other thing on top of that. Hopefully I can get that all done before October content, which I got 4 months. I think I'm all right, but we shall see. Honestly, I am going on vacation next month, but of course this is more shoegaze, except instead of the standard shoegaze noisy varietals we've been looking at, which I will say, as of this new series, that stuff was pretty heat. We had a lot of bangers in there, a lot of really good stuff. We're going to enter some territory of some mixed bags here and there, because today we're talking about more of a dreamy side of shoegaze. We're away from the noise stuff, the noise pop that My Bloody Valentine touched upon, and all the crazy realms of chaos it went to over there. No, today we're talking about more of the dreamy stuff, and you might be wondering, what are we talking about then? And if you watch that old series, you might notice a glaring missing album if you were expecting total shoegaze takeover there, and that album is Souvlaki by Slowdive. I might be pronouncing that one a bit wrong. I've heard it pronounced Souvlaki a bunch of times. It's spelled Souvlaki, and on top of all of that, I really don't care, which I think is the critical component there. I recently watched a Wyatt X Him video where, who, if you don't know, is the YouTuber who stutters and mispronounces things. And this guy in the comments said, you could research how it's pronounced. And he said, I did. And the dude was feuding with him for a while. To which I was like, the whole point is that he mispronounces things. Cut him some slack. One, because it doesn't matter. And two, you shouldn't care. There are more things to be worried about in the world. Like how not everybody knows about Souvlaki by Slowdive, but most people do, so I don't think I have to cover it too much, but let's be honest. If you don't know it, now you do. If you don't know it at all, then that's kind of surprising. This is super dreamy shoegaze, and it is a similar approach to My Bloody Valentine on a total different angle. I guess you could say it is a different approach, but the instrumental setup, while it takes a dreamier, more washed out, sort of hazy look at the whole thing instead of a bright, warm, really angular, noisy, and even gritty sound that My Bloody Valentine would do. This one, the imagery has a bunch of nature elements, also 2 vocalists set up, an unrecognizable instrumental tone at points, really unique sound. Probably my favorite thing about this album is that it doesn't pretend to be a shoegaze album, although it is a shoegaze album. It pretends to be more of an alt-rock album, with the final track, Dagger, being a melancholic ballad that closes the whole thing, sort of touching upon bits of slowcore, maybe a tiny bit of dream pop in there. Really interesting contrast, but also, Machine Gun is amazing. Dude, Allison with one of the best hooks of any shoegaze album ever. Of course, you're going to understand the words on this record much more than My Bloody Valentine, but it's for a very, very satisfying result. So this album does have a very spacey vibe to the whole thing. It is very spacious, which evokes images of actual space, and I don't think it is the absolute peak of that sort of microcosm that is exploring the sort of dreamy space rock stuff, but I think it explores it in a pretty interesting way. It's pretty clear this is a benchmark of the whole genre because the hooks are too good, the melodies are really captivating, the production is very fulfilling overall, of course with The Cure's, with Disintegration by The Cure being just a couple years earlier. This album has a whole lot of appeal, and it's a classic. It's great. And if you like how dreamy it is, you're in luck, because this chart points to liking it dreamy into Fawn's self-titled album. This is an album that is dreamy and very, very soft. I'd say it doubles or even triples down on the textural element here, which it's also very ambient at points, which is its real strength, the way it really envelops you in this interesting atmosphere. Even from the get-go of this album, the opening track has a very, very dreamy soundscape that is preceded by something a lot more warm and bright. And production-wise, you need only look at the end of this track to see something that's truly super fulfilling, just pays off in spades. And the whole album is like this. You know, there's not a lot of moments that I would find displeasing to the ear. In fact, they are all very pleasing to the ear. Like a textural masterpiece is this thing. It's also electronically tinged in a way that feels very, very natural. Little shimmering synths sort of just come off the edges of the guitar tones. It feels very natural and very real. It makes this album's atmosphere that much more pervasive. Kind of a unique little album here I recommend for everybody. I think it's great. If you want it even dreamier, you go into Wild Nothing's Gemini. Now here, it's kind of an interesting distinction because it actually has a more jangly approach that has a very indie vibe to the whole thing. And the electronic tinges do come in here a bit more as well, but it feels very indie, like I said, which it pulls away from the atmosphere. It makes me wonder, how is this dreamier? I think the song Our Composition Book is a solid indie track, but this whole thing suffers from just blatant indie problems. The one benefit of this album is that it is pretty danceable if you like that, but for shoegaze, that's kind of a toss-up if you really want that. The whole album really makes me think of Jamie Stewart of Shoo Shoo talking about how he hates indie rock and how dishonest it is. So I really find it as just okay. It is a passable album. I don't find it any dreamier than either of these other albums here. You really can take it or leave it. And apparently similar to this is Mallory's Not Here, Not Now. I'd say it's actually dreamier and, more importantly, way more inventive than Wild Nothing. It's very relaxing with a sort of ambient tinge to the whole thing. It moves very slowly, almost glacially, but it does have maybe not a sense of urgency, but it doesn't totally stray from the point. It's not like the total ambient noise brick walls we were facing on the My Bloody Valentine side of this chart, and believe me, we'll be finding things that are more ambient than this. I love how consistent this album is, and especially how it almost sounds like one song. Every song is mixed in a way that leads into the next one, which sounds just beautiful. Also, this album has really good dynamics. It gets way louder than something like Slowdive would do, like on the track Words. It works pretty well. The track Worry About Something is gorgeous. I don't think the album is as ironclad as it could be. I think a couple of the tracks kind of lack. They just don't feel as inventive as the rest, or they kind of just do the same ideas that the other tracks are doing. But I think this album is worth a listen. I think it's good. I think there's a lot of strengths here. It might blend just a little bit into the shoegaze genre a bit too much, but I think overall it's not bad. And we sort of go back to Wild Nothing here, and we go into something dreamier. At least that's what the chart says, even though I think the last album was just as dreamy. This is Love Spirals Downwards with Idylls, I guess, Idylls. I don't understand the pronunciation of these things, nor do I care to research it. Remember that. So this one feels like a bit of a struggle at a glance. It has a kind of dated gothic rock sound that sort of leans into the goth rock things that you only really like if you are actually goth. You know, it's stylistic for sure. It has a name for itself. It's just not really in a direction that's pleasing to people other than people who are only into that genre, which I know coming from me, that's a super rich statement here. It's just, you know, it's like it doesn't go into the cool side of goth that more people can get into if they do listen to it. It's like the silly little side of goth. It's the kind of not as greatly mixed side of goth, which is a problem that plagues half the genre. And I do love a lot of goth rock myself, and I feel like this is a great breeding ground for shoegaze. You could easily dip into something dreamier or hazier and make it really dark, but such as bands like Fields of Nephilim or Susie and the Banshees, or especially later era Cure, or I say later era like I don't mean Disintegration, but I mean Disintegration. And this album has a problem of just kind of not sticking out enough from the genre. It just kind of feels a bit more cheaply made, but fortunately it feels kind of like American gothic rock. The vibe of this thing is cool, specifically cool. It's not lame at all. Now, one thing about this album is kind of unique is how it has almost a folkish pagan feeling to the whole thing. You know, I guess Susie and the Banshees kind of evokes that too at points, but this one just kind of falls on its face a bit. The atmosphere isn't as pervasive as it could be, and just the songwriting overall struggles in a few areas. kind of an ambivalent listen for me, something that didn't really give me a lot to work off of. I still think it's okay, just it could be certainly better. And then we're pointing into something dreamier, and due to that last album and a couple other albums that show up here, it makes me wonder why this project in particular doesn't have more albums showing up on this chart, even if they don't apply specifically to shoegaze, because you could argue this one doesn't either, but it kind of does more than some other albums on this chart. Also, the rest of this band's discography is fantastic, and it could fit in with this other stuff. We are talking about Cocteau Twins, Heaven or Las Vegas. Oh, yeah, this thing is great. I don't even need my notes for this one. It's that good. It is bright, shimmering. All of the tones sound like nothing that ever existed. The vocals sound like angels, some sort of weird space angels. They're crazy. And let me say something. So the lyrics are basically inaudible for this whole album because they're done in a way that feels so grammatically incorrect. It works grammatically, it's just not a way people would say it. Like a lot of vocalists do that. I know I kind of do that myself sometimes. My own band, Mutters, we're post-hardcore. Follow us on Instagram, watch our stuff on YouTube, follow our band and send us money. But Cocteau Twins does that in a way that is meant to evoke an otherworldly atmosphere, and it works perfectly. It's so much so that you just can't tell what they're saying. You think you know a word, and it's just, it feels too weird. And you need to only look at the titles of these songs, which are the best song titles I've ever seen ever. Cherry Colored Funk, Heaven or Las Vegas, Frou Frou Foxes and the whatever. It's just all this stuff. It's like, are these even words? I don't know, but it feels like these things are warping in front of your very eyes. And that's just the album at a glance. Look at this album cover and tell me this thing doesn't look incredibly dreamy. This thing predates, like, I don't know, Vaporwave by like 30 years, maybe. Like, this thing is so awesome. It's, okay, maybe not 30 years, more like 20 years, but I think it is just the stuff. The vocals are fantastic. The tones warm you up. This thing will make you feel like you are walking on air in a way that you are so relaxed with. It's so cozy, but in a way that is so alien. This is one of the best albums of all time, man. Get out of my face if you can't listen to this thing, because we got a problem. This thing is so great. You don't even need to watch the rest of this video, but you should, because I deserve it, because I am such a cutie and such a sweetie for making you guys another shoegaze video. And so are you guys as well for watching. I do appreciate it a lot. I have more to talk about though, and I am stalling for I don't know why. Now we're going back to Souvlaki here, and we're gonna go sparser, actually, more spacious, if you will, with a band called Cranes, and the album is known as Forever. Now this one kind of suffers from some of the stuff we were already talking about. Even though it's in a different direction on this chart from Souvlaki, it still has that very gothic sort of theme to it. It feels gothic, a little bit more like traditionally gothic, if you will, like spacious, like a cathedral of some sort. But we're stepping into that ethereal wave subgenre, something that like is pretty spotty on this chart, in all honesty. And this album is very interesting because it's actually rather acoustic guitar filled, and it has a very lethargic vibe overall. Not quite slowcore. It doesn't take itself seriously enough to be slowcore. And the vocals themselves are very polarizing for me. Sometimes I like them, and sometimes I totally don't. And not a lot of times I'm just okay with them. I'm okay with them, I'm more like wondering how I feel about them. It's also an album with a lack of immediacy. It takes a while to get going. Some of these tracks use this for its benefit, but it is rare. I think the track Adrift is the biggest success of this by far. It's sort of like a dreamy pseudo post-rock structure that builds and builds, and it gets really loud. Actually something I like quite a bit. Something very interesting on this album that doesn't have a whole lot to be interested about. I think it's okay. Not a lot here is inherently abrasive, but I also think there's not a lot here that I find appealing to me within or without of the genre of shoegaze. And then we go to more typical punk influenced with a sight for sore eyes. My Bloody Valentine's Isn't Anything. Yeah, this is something I haven't covered in a little bit. Most of My Bloody Valentine's stuff was on the top side of this chart, and now here they are again. And yes, this is a little bit more punk influenced, I guess. I'd say kind of post-punk, the way the dynamics fit in everywhere in a really weird way. As far as My Bloody Valentine goes, first time you listen to Loveless, you don't think it's all that abrasive. It is noisy for sure, but Isn't Anything takes that style in a totally different direction. It throws in elements that seem to not fit as much, but they make it all the more hazy and psychedelic in a way that isn't like a blanket of sound like Loveless. It's in a way that's a bit more almost like art rock leaning. Also, if you like My Bloody Valentine's early shoegaze EPs, you'll like the vocals here a lot more. They are not as dreamy as they are on Loveless. And also the EP surrounding Loveless, the vocals are super dreamy as well. But here it is just as I don't want to say clean necessarily, but they're definitely cleaner. They're just like the effects make them sound kind of alien, but not like totally fuzzed out. It is really interesting stuff. Now, unlike the brick wall of haze that Loveless is, this album has every song sounding very different. While Loveless, you could find a few tracks that sound pretty similar, although it is entirely to its benefit. It just makes the album feel so cohesive and thick. This album feels like a whole bunch of different songs, even though they are thematically and sonically tied together, just not as deeply. They definitely have their differences. Every song is great. It's very cozy. It's a very nice twee vibe to the whole thing. I think it is utterly fantastic. It's a great album, and no one should be surprised. Now, going from Cranes into something noisier and more gothic, we're going into something that is proto-shoegaze and something that's awesome. Jesus and the Mary Chain's Psycho Candy, which is something that is so sick. We're more into the noise rock territory here, a bit of a sort of burning intensity of punk, of bands like Sonic Youth, but this dips into shoegaze at points. It's definitely on the noisier side, but this thing is dry and hot sounding. Total unique desert-like atmosphere here, but like the sound is like burning red hot metal. It's like really cool. The whole thing feels like leather. It's certainly not insanely goth, but the way it grooves and the noisiness floats over the top covers it so well. The vocals are a bit on the gothic side, and here it's done stylistically in a way that is much more appealing, in a way that fits very well, in a way that the atmosphere truly carries through. I mostly just I really hope most of you find the time to explore this album more yourself. I don't really need to talk about it any more than I have to, but one thing that's kind of interesting is the dual vocalist setup. I believe this is the oldest album on the whole chart here, but having a male and female vocalist is something that almost every shoegaze band in this current decade loves to imitate. But bands back then were certainly doing them a lot as well. And if you couldn't tell, it's great. Please explore it for yourself. It's an album that really takes you out of this chart a little bit into some really cool territory. It's one that's super influential. It's one that's really great. If you don't enjoy it, I don't even believe you. And for a similar album, we have Mercury Rev with, I don't know how to pronounce this at all, Boses, I don't know, Boces. It's the one with the face on it. And this album is really bizarre. I actually own a Mercury Rev CD. I have it over here somewhere in my CD case. I might as well find it. Yeah. Here's my CD. It's Deserter Songs by Mercury Rev. I got it for $4, as you can see there. And while $4 isn't exactly a huge undertaking, there's a reason I bought it without knowing a single sound of it, what it sounds like, because Mercury Rev's this album is something that is so incredible that I can take a risk on anything else they do, because even if it's half as good, I'm still going to love it. So you certainly get an abrasive, punky edge to this whole thing, kind of like Jesus and the Mary Chain did, but what you get here almost has more of a progressive pop edge to the whole thing, almost kind of like a Zolo kind of weird vibe to the whole thing, but it's pretty at times. It's very well thought out. So the track Downs Are Feminine Balloons is probably my favorite track here if you just need something to grasp while I try to find the words to really describe this album, but you get something really bizarre and something that is really gratifying, but in a way that's kind of hard to describe because it feels like a whole lot of drugs were involved in this thing. It's varied though. It feels like a weird mix between Swerve Driver and Spiritualized, which are two bands that in the world of dreamy shoegaze style music, they're not really comparable. Spiritualized is far more patient and spacious, and Swerve Driver is a rock band, but you have the attitude of that, and I guess Spiritualized does have that rock and roll attitude, but it's something that is so bizarre. This album is really a drugged out atmosphere, and it sounds really cool. It's just hard to grasp. It is extremely diverse, even what I would call avant-garde at some points. Honestly, it is a masterful record and easily top 3 on this corner of the chart. It is something truly phenomenal and underrated, super underrated. It's so great. It's really fantastic. And a band that is similar is the Radio Department with Lesser Matters, which is an album that's just super gay. It's really gay. No, like seriously, it's an album about like being gay. Like it's LGBT. Like I think the dude in this band is gay, and he has a song about, I think it's called Keen on Boys. He likes men, and it's so well written that me as a straight guy can relate to a lot of this. And I mean, I don't know, I can relate to a lot of shoo stuff, even though Jamie Stewart's gay, but like that's a whole different thing. That's a sad reason. This is a happy reason. It's very passionate, kind of beautiful, and it's shoegaze, so it is beautiful. And there's a lot of indie-tronica feelings to this whole thing. You know, various keyboard settings that give it a really lush, warm, cozy feeling. It's pretty nice. There's a really nice variety between this thing, between real and electronic drums, which I think texturally just gives it a little boost. It's really cozy and very unique. It almost feels like shoegaze on accident, like it was trying to do an indie record that ended up being shoegaze just through really loud, bright tones, which is a thing some indie bands do sometimes, and it's something I like. So, and this album's great. I would love to hear some more of this stuff. It's a band I need to check out a bit more. I've re-listened to this album since, and it's still very, very nice and very cozy, and a rather chill one to end this video out on. I'll be doing one more episode of this particular branch of the chart, but other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any likes to spare, please provide something. I probably just covered my microphone there trying to look like I was being a poor beggar, but any comments, questions, or concerns you could put down below if you'd like or feel a certain need to. Also, in this description down below, I have my social media, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, my Discord page. Please join. We're fun and awesome and cool and really great and beautiful people in there. So please come talk about music. And gosh, I think that's about it. So I hope you guys are doing well out there. Have a good day. Bye.